Join our friend Jackie as she takes us into the Mafia roots. How did this Italian brotherhood begin and how has it evolved? It is a fascinating story of how power takes an advantage of poverty and fear. Ready? Let's go! Ciao Jackie,
Hi,
buonasera.
Dario.
Thank you again. We are so much looking forward to know what's going on. We got the point of the unification of Italy. And so my first question is, what I learned last time is, wow, we were the ones progressive, like prosperous, rich, wealthy, and really we were leading the life, right? The country,
We
really.
had a lot of potential, at least.
Exactly. In the 1700, I mean, for hundreds of years, you said, of years, and 1700, 1800s, and then all of a sudden, for a sum of factors that you just mentioned in our last meeting, the
Mhm.
Piedmontese, the people from the north, basically with the help of Garibaldi, conquered, I mean, pushed away the Spanish thanks to the new alliance with the Brits, who were in Sicily. This is what you told us last time, and was really kind of a
Yeah.
shocking moment for me. But anyway, so how did we move from being the wealthy people to gradually become really the poorest under the king of Italy? I mean, what really did happen from the political, social, or economical standpoint?
Well, bear in mind that before 1861, the level of literacy was almost the same in northern Italy and in southern Italy. People were able to read and write. About 20% of people in northern Italy were literate, and
Mhm.
also here in Sicily and southern Italy, about 20%. It's true that we didn't have any public schools in Sicily and southern Italy. And one of the promises that had been made by the new Savoy government with Italian unification was that of opening up public schools for everybody.
Mm,
You know
interesting.
what? That didn't happen in the South. Not until about 1900. Public schools started to be opened up in northern Italy in the 1870s. Here in the South is starting from 1869 in order to get money to pay for the war debts, for what the war had meant. The new government, originally in Piedmont, because you know that the capital was first in Turin, then in
Yeah.
Florence, then in Rome, the new government from Piedmont required not only for the Sicilians and Southern Italians to pay extra taxes for a war that we did not ask for, as if it was our fault, but
Actually, they were the conqueror, so they paid for their expenses. We paid their
we paid
bills.
for the expenses of them coming and conquering us. But something horrible that happened was that church properties were confiscated, monasteries, convents. Now, why was that bad? Because nuns and monks and priests were actually teaching even the children of the poorest families. A farmer could have sent his children to the nearby Dominican monastery or convent, and their sons and daughters could have learned to read and write. And if it was a girl, she could have also learned how to sew, for example, how to sew her own clothing, how to embroider. So, with the confiscation of church properties in 1869 to get more money for the new Italian kingdom, unfortunately, our schools were closed. And while, as I said, while in Piedmont, in northern Italy, schools were opened up starting in the 1870s, here in Sicily, we didn't see a public school until the 1900s. Okay, so obviously this affected us socially. Then think of all the gold in Naples. It was all taken away, again, to pay for the new kingdom, for the new plans that the Savoy kings had. And and then the sulfur mines, children were hired to work almost as slaves in the sulfur mines of Sicily, and a lot of social situations really got worse. They got worse. There was a lot of poverty. Instead of dividing up the lands amongst all the people, unfortunately, lands still in Sicily, lands remained in the hands of the so-called latifonte, the extensive real estates, in the hands of very few people. So this brought more social unrest in the countryside. And in the 1880s, something called the so-called fasci siciliani, I don't know if you ever heard of them, in the 1880s, farmers, even farmers in my parents' hometown in central Sicily, women, young boys, and men started to protest with the new government in northern Italy because they wanted a, a little piece of land, a plot of land, because they were hungry, they were starving, they needed to make a living. And instead of understanding the situation in the countryside of Sicily, somebody who I really dislike, Francesco Crispi, who came from Sicily, who became the first prime minister of Italy, he ordered the army, the Italian army, to shoot at the farmers. Many people died during the so-called fasci siciliani. And it was after these type of protests in the 1890s, 1900s, that many Sicilians felt that the only way out of this situation with no future was to leave Sicily and migrate to the United States, to America and South America. And the same happened with people from Calabria, from Campania, from Puglia. Okay, so these were different situations, the social situations, economical situations that brought despair in the lives of many people here in southern Italy. Okay, there was no future for us. Okay, even if a few people had dreamt a united Italy, nothing for us here in the south.
Right. So what I see is, I mean, the wealth, um, uh, the Piedmontese took all the wealth to pay off, all their bills from the war, financially. So they took as much advantage as possible to really pay their bills, and so that was a very the first financial action. Socially, they really pushed us because I'm Sicilian, but anyway, they pushed the people from the south. Yeah, I mean, like, they pushed culturally and socially in a very low situation, right? And so these, together with so many people decided to just leave, and of course, as a big part of the population emigrated, yeah, the remaining population really became even more, poor. It was even more difficult for them to.
Yes, that's right, Dad.
So these three factors are really
Things
a
didn't
key.
change until after World War II and after the proclamation of an Italian republic. Then things, even there, it took a long time, but things started to move towards some type of change. Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting. Because now really it makes so much sense. This inversion. I mean, how it was really inverted the wealth, and it was actually a war. I mean, we just paid the price of being the loser. That's it. It is that simple.
That's right. Okay, in
It
a
was.
certain sense.
And so let me ask you this: how? Because I always told to our guests when I talk about the mafia, I love to speak first of all about kind of an historical evolution, key points of the history of mafia. And I usually I learned from a professor that many years ago that we think that the mafia phenomenon was born exactly in 1861. I mean, exactly in the same moment of the unification of Italy, when the country was took by the Piedmontese and became a whole kingdom. Right, because in a way there was a government quite far from Sicily. Now I'm learning quite oppressive toward the Sicilians, and so I was absent, and that was the very first reason there was a new organization helping the poor people called Mafia.
Helping the poor people. Oh dear.
Right. Well. Okay. Okay. That's a very tricky. So, what is okay? As you are the historian here. So, what is, in your perspective, in your opinion, what are the roots of this phenomenon, criminous phenomenon, as it is today? But what were the roots at that time?
Well, the roots go just they're just a little before 1861. You know, in 1812, at the time, the Bourbon king, Ferdinando, the first of the two Sicilies, he finally abolished, he put an end to feudalism in 1812. So the landowners, all of a sudden, didn't have any free labor anymore. They couldn't pay all the farmers working their land, and they abandoned these great extensive rural estates, especially in the breadbox of Sicily, in the heart of Sicily, where a lot of grain, a lot of wheat was being grown. So who stayed there? The so-called gabellotti. The gabellotti were the people who were taking care of the land when the prince or the count or the landowners were not there. They were collecting taxes. They stayed on the land, even though they no longer had the right to collect taxes for the prince or the count or whatnot. And this was the beginnings of the mafia.
So these guys, the Gabellotti, I know the word camperi.
They were often referred to as the galantuomini because the Gabellotti sometimes were maybe of an upper class. They could have been the youngest brothers, the younger brothers of the prince or the count or the baron. And so they knew how to read and write. They dressed in a more aristocratic way. So they were often referred to as the galantuomini. Okay. Now, in order to keep control on this land, to keep control over the poor people who, as we just said, just kept on getting more and more poor. They became poorer as the years went by and different political situations evolved. The Gabellotti hired brigands. They hired bands of people to do their dirty work, to collect extortion money. For example, they would tell the shepherds, if you don't pay this money, tomorrow you won't find your sheep anymore. Okay, and so it was orchestrated. It was orchestrated by the Gabellotti, the Galantuomini, as they were referred to, but they had people working for them. So this was the beginnings of the mafia. Why? Because after 1812, when feudalism was abolished, unfortunately, at the time, the Bourbon dynasty did not create a new social, judicial, and political system to bring justice to those lands. Think of it, originally the landowners, the prince, the count, they also were like judges. They had the power to mete out justice on the lands. When they weren't there anymore, who was going to do it? The central government in Palermo or in Catania?
Or in Turin?
Yeah, later in Turin, but in the beginning it was in Palermo, in Catania, because that's where the judges and the police were. It was very difficult for the police forces to get to the countryside because the road system was horrible. Okay, think of it. The road from Palermo to Corleone before the 1990s, it was a terrible road, and it was easy for it was very difficult for the police to arrive and bring control. if a crime was committed. Okay, so the people who were meting out justice, so to speak, in an unjust way, were the so-called gabellotti, who started to become the beginning of the mafiosi, of the dons, the heads of the mafia. So that's how it started. Certainly, with all the problems that issued after 1861, it was much easier for these people in the countryside to take control, okay, of the unrest. I mentioned earlier that there were the so-called fasci siciliani. These farmers, where could they look towards? Who could they look towards to for some help? Okay, so that was the beginning of the mafia. Okay, they got more and more control. It was never to help the poor. It was always a question of territorial control and making money. First in the countryside, then in the cities, and then, as you know, in the 1950s, it started with the international narcotics business with the United States, between the United States mafia, the so-called mano nera, the black hand, and Cosa Nostra here in Sicily. But it started in the countryside in any case.
So at that time, life was in the countryside, and actually, what you just mentioned about the Piedmontese, the central government taking all the wealth, pushing them away, pushing people, losing the consent among the people, basically pushed all of them, or part of them, not really all of them, but part of them, to so easily under the control of these gentlemen who were the mafiosi, right? I mean, that was
They had no choice. If they didn't pay the price, they would lose their sheep, they would lose their grain, the wheat. There was no real police forces that were really taking care of the countryside.
right. You said something so interesting. You said you mentioned that many Sicilians or people from Naples, in general from the south, that was emigrated to the United States, right, or North America. And you said because they felt that like they had no future. And
Children would put on ships and by their families here in Sicily, hoping little boys, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, in the hope that that child would find a future in America
on
because it
their
was so difficult here.
and just sent on their own.
Yes, a lot of children arrived in like today. You think of immigration today, and
Mhm.
sometimes don't we hear about people who are under the age of 18 who arrive from African
Right.
countries, and because sometimes it's not a case of economics. It's a social thing, okay? Because these children have no future in their countries. The same thing happened with us here in the South. Instead of having a government, a central government that opened up schools, that gave the opportunity to people to actually establish a business or have a piece of land to cultivate, the, the people were left alone.
Right.
And many families, there were large families back then, out of desperation to give a future to their children, sometimes they put their son on a boat, on a ship, on their own to go to America. Okay, not accompanied by an adult. So that truly happened.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, situation, the social, it was so easy for the mafiosi to take the control on those people, and you said they felt like they had no future, and they felt like they had no option, and which are two
Exactly.
incredibly strong factors to make you basically to push you in a way where you feel just stuck, and you can't do anything else that just obey, uh, and either become a mafioso, I mean be with them, or just be under them.
Pretend it didn't exist, right? Because people were afraid. It's not.
Right.
Don't think that. I mean, most Sicilians were not with the mafia. Most Sicilians pretended not to see. A lot of people pretended not to see. They didn't say anything because they had nobody to ask for help. Who was going to
Right.
help them? Anyway, then things started to change a bit after 1944, 1945. If you think about it, the last major autonomy movement in Sicily happened in 1944 after the Allies, the American and British and Canadian Allies arrived. Sicily was liberated from fascism first in 1943, then the rest of Italy. And what did the Sicilian people do? They started thinking of becoming independent again. There was a movement for Sicily to break away from Italy and become an American colony in 1944. This didn't happen because in 1946, Umberto II of Savoy signed a decree allowing Sicily to become an autonomous region of Italy. If this hadn't happened, I don't know what would have happened if Sicily would have still been a part of Italy. Okay.
Or with US. And I wonder what would be the best. I mean, I honestly wish we could be.
I always dream of a united Italy, Dario. Okay, I have nothing against today, even today, with what's happening. I dream of Italy truly, truly being united, North and South, really, truly together.
Even if sometimes it's very tough, you know. You know that. Okay, well, it's already almost half an hour. Thank you so much, Jackie. That has been so interesting. I learned a lot and I opened my mind. I mean, I'm Sicilian. I grew up in Palermo, and in a way, I mean, I knew all of this, but you gave us certainly a very interesting perspective of the situation.
Thank you very much.
I will talk to an incredible person who actually fight against the mafia, because he's a police officer, but he's also a writer, and he knows a lot about the fight against the mafia. Happened in the 80s and 90s, in the last 30 years. Yeah, so it's a very interesting topic, and it's always important for me to talk about it, not in a Godfather way. I mean, it is a criminal phenomenon, but it's important to go deep in the context that where that phenomenon really took place, because it's part of who we are in a way. I mean, as you said, many Sicilians are not mafiosi, of course, but in a way, all of us at some point need to deal with that, you know, culturally. I grew up and it wasn't a big deal, but anyway, it's part of the system anyway.
It's part of the system, but you know the good thing is that a lot of the let's say the anti-mafia movements came from Sicily, and now they're spreading all over Italy, all over the world. So that's very positive. The new generation will not allow the mafia to prevail again.
Right. It's a way like we exported the virus and then we worked on the vaccine as well. Just to use a common word of this period.
I like that.
Okay, grazie, grazie Jackie. Ciao, see you soon. Bye.